She mistook the millionaire for a taxi driver. He said nothing and drove her home. The rain came down in sheets across downtown Seattle, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon and blurred headlights. Grace Winters stood under the awning of Providence Medical Center, her scrubs soaked through despite the thin jacket she'd thrown over them, her phone clutched in one hand, showing the same frustrating message: no available drivers in your area. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night in late October, and Grace had just finished a brutal 14-hour shift in the emergency department. Her feet ached, her back screamed, and all she wanted was to get home to her apartment, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. But every rideshare app showed the same thing: surge pricing at 3.5x normal rates and wait times over 45 minutes. She couldn't afford the surge pricing, not this week. Not after her landlord had raised the rent and her student loan payment had hit her account that morning. She had exactly $47 in her checking account until her next paycheck on Tuesday, and that had to cover groceries and gas for her beaten-down Honda Civic that was currently sitting in the shop with a blown transmission she also couldn't afford to fix. Grace closed her eyes and took a breath, fighting back the exhaustion-fueled tears that wanted to come. She was 31 years old, a registered nurse with 7 years of experience, and she was standing in the rain at midnight, trying to figure out how to get home because she was too broke for a taxi. Long night? Grace's eyes snapped open. A man stood a few feet away, also under the awning, holding a to-go cup of coffee from the hospital cafeteria. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that was damp from the rain, and sharp features that would have been intimidating if not for the genuine concern in his gray eyes. He wore dark jeans and a simple black Henley under a leather jacket that looked expensive but worn in. Comfortable. "You could say that," Grace said, quickly wiping at her eyes, embarrassed to be caught on the verge of crying by a stranger. "Waiting for a ride?" he asked, nodding toward her phone. "Trying to," Grace admitted. But apparently everyone in Seattle decided they needed a ride at the exact same time. The man glanced at her scrubs, at the hospital ID badge still clipped to her jacket. "You work here?" "Emergency department," Grace confirmed. "Just finished a double shift." Something shifted in his expression, respect maybe, or empathy. "That's rough, especially on a Friday night." "Friday nights are always interesting," Grace said with a tired smile. "Full moons and Fridays. That's when things get really exciting." The man smiled back, and Grace noticed he had a nice smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made small crinkles at the corners. "I can imagine. My mother was a nurse. She used to say the same thing." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the rain. Then the man said casually, "I'm heading out anyway. I could give you a ride if you need one." Every alarm bell Grace had been taught to listen to went off immediately. Never get in a car with a stranger. Never accept rides from men you don't know, especially at night, especially when you're alone and vulnerable. But she was exhausted and broke, and the alternative was standing here for another hour in wet scrubs waiting for a rideshare that might never come. "That's kind of you," Grace said carefully, "but I don't even know you." "Fair point," the man said. He pulled out his wallet and handed her a business card. "I'm Cameron Drake. I own a tech company downtown. I was here visiting a friend who had surgery this afternoon. My car's in the garage across the street. It's a black Tesla Model S. You can take a picture of my license plate, text it to someone, do whatever makes you feel safe. I'm just offering to help out someone who clearly had a harder day than I did." Grace took the card. It was simple, elegant. Cameron Drake, CEO, Drake Technologies. There was a phone number and an email address, and the cardstock felt expensive. She looked up at him, trying to read his intentions. He didn't have the predatory look some men got when they've sensed vulnerability. He just looked like someone offering help the way normal, decent people did. "Where are you headed?" Cameron asked. "Capitol Hill," Grace said, "near Volunteer Park." "That's on my way home," Cameron said, which may or may not have been true, but Grace appreciated that he was giving her an out, a reason that wasn't just pity. "Seriously, I'm going that direction anyway. You'd be saving me from a boring drive alone." Grace looked down at her phone. Still no available drivers. She looked at the business card. She looked at Cameron Drake, who was patiently waiting for her decision without pressuring her. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." "No problem," Cameron said. Easily. Let's get you out of the rain. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want you to tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. The parking garage was 3 levels underground, and Cameron led her to a sleek black Tesla that probably cost more than Grace made in a year. He unlocked it remotely, and the interior lights came on, revealing cream leather seats and a dashboard that looked like something from a spaceship. Grace hesitated at the passenger door. "Still time to change your mind," Cameron said, reading her hesitation. "No hard feelings if you want to wait for your rideshare." But standing there looking at this expensive car with heated seats and a dry interior, Grace's exhausted body made the decision for her. "No, I'm good," she said, sliding into the passenger seat. The car was immaculate and smelled faintly of leather and something clean, like cedar. Grace had never been in a car this nice. Her Honda Civic had cloth seats with coffee stains and a check engine light that had been on for 6 months. Cameron got in the driver's side and started the car with the touch of a button. Soft music immediately played through speakers that Grace couldn't even see but sounded incredible. "Address?" Cameron asked, pulling up the navigation on the screen. Grace gave him her street address, and he entered it smoothly. The car calculated the route, 18 minutes. As they pulled out of the parking garage and into the rain-soaked Seattle streets, Grace found herself hyper-aware of the situation. She was in a stranger's car at midnight. She'd broken every safety rule her mother had ever taught her. But Cameron didn't seem interested in small talk or asking personal questions. He just drove, his attention on the road, occasionally adjusting the temperature or the music volume. "Too cold?" he asked after a few minutes, noticing her shiver. "No, I'm fine. Just wet." From the rain? Without a word, Cameron reached into the back seat and produced a fleece blanket, handing it to her. "I keep it back there for emergencies," he said. "You're welcome to it." Grace wrapped the blanket around herself, and the warmth was immediate and wonderful. "Thank you." "You mentioned you worked a double shift," Cameron said, keeping his eyes on the road. "That's what, 16 hours? 14, Grace corrected. 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. was scheduled, but we got slammed right at shift change. I couldn't leave my team short-staffed, so I stayed until 11. "That's a long day." "It's the job," Grace said. "People don't stop having emergencies just because my shift is over." "Still," Cameron said, "that takes dedication. Most people wouldn't stay." "Most nurses would," Grace said. "We don't leave each other hanging. It's kind of an unspoken rule." They drove in silence for a few minutes, and Grace found herself relaxing incrementally. Cameron was a good driver, smooth, cautious, not aggressive like a lot of Seattle drivers. He let people merge. He didn't tailgate. He didn't curse at red lights. "Can I ask you something?" Cameron said after a while. "Sure." "Why were you trying to get a ride share if the surge pricing was that high?" "I saw your phone screen. It was showing almost $60 for the ride." Grace felt her face heat with embarrassment. "Because I can't afford $60 right now. I was hoping if I waited long enough, the surge would drop." She expected judgment or pity or the uncomfortable silence that came when you admitted to financial struggles around someone who clearly had money. But Cameron just nodded. "Healthcare doesn't pay enough," he said simply. "My mother used to say the same thing. She worked for 30 years as an ICU nurse and retired making less than entry-level engineers at my company make right out of college. It's backwards." "It is," Grace agreed, surprised by his matter-of-fact tone. "But I love the work, most days." "What made today rough?" Cameron asked. "Besides the length of it." Grace thought about whether to answer honestly, then decided she was too tired to filter. "We lost someone," she said quietly. "A 19-year-old kid, motorcycle accident. We did everything right by the book, but sometimes that's not enough. His mother," Grace's voice cracked. "His mother made this sound when we told her. I've been a nurse for 7 years, and I've never heard anything like it. It's going to stay with me." Cameron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "I'm sorry. That's incredibly hard." "It is," Grace said. "But you can't take it home with you. You can't carry every loss or you'll drown. So you process it, you learn from it, and you show up again tomorrow, ready to save the next person." "That's a hell of a way to live," Cameron said, and there was something like awe in his voice. "It's the only way I know how," Grace admitted. They turned onto Capitol Hill, climbing the steep streets toward Volunteer Park. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, and through the trees, Grace could see the lights of the city spreading out below. It's beautiful up here, Cameron said. It is, Grace agreed. I can't really afford this neighborhood anymore, but I've lived in this apartment for 5 years, and my landlord was decent until this year. I'm holding on as long as I can. What changed this year? New property management company bought the building, raised everyone's rent by 20%. A lot of my neighbors moved out. I probably should too, but Grace shrugged. I like my apartment, I like this neighborhood, and I'm stubborn. Cameron smiled. Stubborn can be good. They pulled up in front of a modest 3-story building with a green door and window boxes that someone, probably Mrs. Chen on the first floor, kept filled with seasonal flowers. Right now, they held mums in shades of orange and burgundy. Grace unbuckled her seatbelt and started to fold the blanket, but Cameron waved her off. Keep it. Consider it payment for giving me someone interesting to talk to on the drive. I can't take your blanket, Grace protested. I have 3 more at home, Cameron said. Seriously, keep it. Grace clutched the soft fleece, suddenly feeling emotional in the way exhaustion made everything feel bigger. Thank you, for the ride, for the blanket, for listening. You really saved me tonight. You saved yourself, Cameron said. I just drove. But, Grace, can I give you my number? Her guard went up immediately. Cameron saw it and quickly added, Not like that. I mean, if you ever need a ride and the apps are surging, text me. If I'm available, I'll come get you. No strings, no expectations. Just someone who doesn't think nurses should have to stand in the rain for an hour after saving lives all day. Grace studied his face in the dim light from the dashboard. He looked sincere, maybe a little hopeful, but not pushy. Okay, she said slowly. But only for emergencies. Only for emergencies, Cameron agreed, pulling up a new contact on his phone and handing it to her. Grace entered her number and handed it back. Their fingers brushed, and she felt an unexpected spark of something. Awareness, maybe. Interest. She pushed it aside. He was a tech CEO who drove a Tesla. She was a nurse who couldn't afford her rent. They existed in completely different worlds. Get some sleep, Cameron said as she opened the door. And Grace, thank you for what you do, for showing up, for staying late, for carrying the weight of other people's worst days. It matters. Grace felt her throat tighten. Thank you for saying that? She got out of the car and hurried through the drizzle to her building's door. When she turned back, Cameron was still there, waiting to make sure she got inside safely. She waved and he waved back before pulling away into the night. Grace climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, let herself in, and immediately collapsed on her couch, still wrapped in the borrowed blanket. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Made it home. Hope you sleep well. Cameron Grace stared at the message, at the simple kindness of someone checking to make sure she was okay. She saved the number, Cameron Drake, emergency rides only, and sent back a single word. Thanks. Then she dragged herself to the shower, washed away the hospital smell and the exhaustion, and fell into bed. Her last thought before sleep took her was that she'd just had the strangest, most unexpected encounter of her life with a millionaire who'd pretended to be nothing more than someone offering a ride in the rain. And she had absolutely no idea what to do with that. Cameron Drake drove home to his penthouse condo in Belltown, parked his Tesla in his reserved spot, and rode the elevator to the 23rd floor. His apartment was all glass and steel and open concept, the kind of place featured in architecture, magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Elliott Bay and the Space Needle. The furniture was designer, the art was original, the kitchen had appliances he rarely used because he usually ordered in or ate at restaurants. It was impressive. It was expensive. It was also, if Cameron was being honest with himself, deeply impersonal and lonely. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and stood at the windows, looking out over the city lights reflecting on the water. He thought about Grace Winters and her soaked scrubs, trying not to cry from exhaustion, about the way she'd talked about losing a patient with the kind of raw honesty that came from someone who genuinely cared, about her pride when she'd admitted she couldn't afford the surge pricing, like it was a personal failing instead of a systematic problem. Cameron had built Drake Technologies from a startup in his garage to a company worth $340 million. He employed over 200 people. He'd been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, and Seattle Business Magazine. But Grace Winters, who saved lives for a living and couldn't afford a taxi ride home, had made him feel more human in 18 minutes than anyone had in years. His phone buzzed. A text from his CFO about quarterly projections. Another from his assistant confirming Monday's schedule. A third from a woman he'd gone on 2 dates with, suggesting drinks tomorrow night. Cameron ignored all of them. Instead, he looked at the single word Grace had sent him, thanks, and smiled. He had no idea what he was doing. He had no plan. All he knew was that something about Grace Winters had reached through all his carefully constructed walls and reminded him what it felt like to connect with someone real. And he wanted more of that feeling, even if it meant driving through the rain at midnight, pretending to be nothing more than a man offering a ride. Even if it meant that, for the first time in his very controlled, very calculated life, Cameron Drake had absolutely no idea what would happen next. Grace didn't text Cameron. For 3 weeks, his number sat in her phone under emergency rides only, and she told herself she wouldn't use it unless she was truly desperate. She wasn't going to be that woman who took advantage of a stranger's kindness just because she was broke and he had a nice car. But on the 4th Friday after their initial meeting, Grace found herself in an almost identical situation. Another double shift. Another surge pricing nightmare. Another night standing in the rain at 11:30 p.m. trying to figure out how to get home. She stared at Cameron's contact information for a full 5 minutes, her thumb hovering over the message button. This is stupid, she told herself. He was just being polite. He probably doesn't even remember you. But her feet hurt so badly she wanted to cry, and she had to be back at the hospital in 9 hours for another shift, and the buses had stopped running on her route an hour ago. Grace took a breath and typed quickly before she could change her mind. Hi, it's Grace from a few weeks ago. I know this is probably weird, but I'm stuck at the hospital again with no ride and ridiculous surge pricing. If you're available and weren't just being polite, I could really use help. No worries if not. She hit send and immediately regretted it. He was probably out at some fancy restaurant or charity gala. He was a CEO. He had a life. He wasn't sitting around waiting to rescue struggling nurses from the rain. Her phone buzzed 30 seconds later. I remember you, Grace. I'm 20 minutes away. Can you wait inside where it's warm? Grace's heart did something complicated. Yes. Thank you so much. I owe you. You don't owe me anything. See you soon. Grace went back inside the hospital and stood in the lobby, suddenly aware that she looked like absolute hell. Her scrubs had various unidentifiable stains, her hair was falling out of its ponytail, and she was pretty sure she had dried coffee on her cheek. But it was too late to do anything about it, because Cameron's Tesla pulled up to the entrance exactly 20 minutes later, and he was getting out of the car, jogging through the rain to the lobby entrance. He looked unfairly good in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater, his hair slightly damp from the rain, those sharp gray eyes finding her immediately. Ready? He asked with that same easy smile from before. Ready, Grace confirmed. And seriously, thank you. I know this is inconvenient. It's not, Cameron interrupted gently. Come on, let's get you home. The drive started in comfortable silence, Grace once again wrapped in the fleece blanket Cameron had apparently left in his car for her. The gesture made something warm bloom in her chest. He'd kept it there, like he'd anticipated she might need it again. Another double shift? Cameron asked after a few minutes. Is it that obvious? Grace asked wryly. You have that 1,000-yard stare that comes from dealing with too many people's emergencies in one day, Cameron said. My mother used to get the same look. Used to? Grace caught the past tense. She passed away 3 years ago, Cameron said, his voice steady but soft. Breast cancer. By the time they caught it, it had already spread to her lymph nodes and liver. She fought for 18 months, but he trailed off. I'm so sorry, Grace said, meaning it. That's devastating. It was, Cameron agreed. She was my best friend, the person who taught me everything important. When she died, I realized I'd spent so much time building my company that I'd missed a lot of her final years. I can't get that time back. Grace heard the regret in his voice, the kind that came from someone who'd learned a hard lesson too late. Is that why you were at the hospital that first night, visiting a friend who had surgery? Cameron glanced at her, something like surprise in his expression. You remember that? I remember most of what people tell me, Grace said. Nursing teaches you to pay attention to details. My friend Marcus had an appendectomy, Cameron confirmed. Nothing serious, but I wanted to make sure he was okay. We've known each other since college. They drove for a few minutes in silence, climbing the hill toward Capitol Hill. Then Grace asked, "What does your company do?" "You said tech, but that covers a lot of territory." "We develop software for healthcare systems," Cameron said. "Electronic medical records, patient management systems, data analytics that help hospitals track outcomes and improve care. Basically, I try to make the administrative side of healthcare less painful for people like you." Grace turned to look at him fully. "Wait, Drake Technologies? You're that Cameron Drake?" "Guilty," Cameron said, and he looked almost embarrassed. "Your EMR system is what we use at Providence," Grace said, pieces clicking together. "It's actually pretty good, way better than the last system we had." "That's good to hear," Cameron said, and he sounded genuinely pleased. "We've spent 5 years refining it based on feedback from nurses and doctors. They're the ones actually using it, so their input matters most." "Most tech companies don't think that way," Grace observed. "Most tech companies didn't have mothers who spent 30 years fighting with broken systems that made her job harder instead of easier," Cameron said. "I built this company because I watched my mother come home frustrated every night with software that crashed, records that disappeared, and interfaces that required a PhD to navigate. I wanted to fix that." Grace felt her perception of him shifting. She'd assumed he was just another tech bro who'd gotten lucky. But he'd built his company with purpose, with personal motivation rooted in watching someone he loved struggle. "Your mother would be proud," Grace said softly. Cameron's jaw tightened briefly, emotion flickering across his face. "I hope so. I like to think the work we do makes things a little easier for nurses like you and her." "It does," Grace confirmed. "The system isn't perfect, but it's functional. And it actually seems designed by people who understand workflow, instead of by engineers who've never set foot in a hospital." "That's because we hire nurses as consultants," Cameron said. "We pay them to tell us what we're doing wrong and what we need to fix. It makes the engineers crazy sometimes, but the product is better for it." They pulled up in front of Grace's building, and she felt an unexpected pang of disappointment that the drive was over. Talking to Cameron was easy in a way that talking to people rarely was for her. He listened. He asked real questions. He didn't try to impress her or dominate the conversation. "Thank you again," Grace said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "I know I keep saying that, but I really mean it. You've saved me twice now." "I haven't saved you," Cameron said. "I've just driven you home. There's a difference." "Still counts. As saving when the alternative is spending money I don't have or standing in the rain for an hour," Grace said. Cameron looked like he wanted to say something, then stopped himself. Finally, he said, "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why is money so tight? You're an experienced nurse at a major hospital. You should be making decent money." Grace appreciated that he asked directly instead of dancing around it. "Student loans mostly. I have about $80,000 left from nursing school and my undergrad. The payments are $600 a month. Then there's rent, which just went up to $1,650, utilities, groceries, car insurance, or at least there was car insurance before my transmission died. By the time I pay all the necessities, there's not much left. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I have a job I love and I'm not drowning, just treading water." Cameron's expression darkened. "That's not sustainable." "Welcome to healthcare in America," Grace said with a tired smile. "We take care of everyone, else while barely taking care of ourselves." "That's backwards," Cameron said firmly. "It is," Grace agreed. "But it's reality. So I work doubles when I can get them, I eat a lot of rice and beans, and I budget down to the last dollar. And I'm fine. Really, I'm not looking for pity or a handout." "I know you're not," Cameron said. "You're one of the most independent people I've met. But Grace, everyone needs help sometimes. That's not weakness. That's just being human." "Is that why you keep offering me rides?" Grace asked. "Because you think I need help?" "I offer you rides," Cameron said carefully, "because I think you deserve not to have to stand in the rain after saving lives for 14 hours. And because, honestly, I like talking to you." Grace's heart did that complicated thing again. "You barely know me. I know you stayed late to help your team, even though you were exhausted," Cameron said. "I know you carry the weight of losing patience and show up the next day anyway. I know you're stubborn and proud, and doing everything you can to stay in an apartment you love, even though it's financially straining you. I know you remember details about people, like the fact that I was visiting a friend 3 weeks ago. Those aren't small things, Grace." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said, "I like talking to you too, even though you're way too nice to be real." Cameron laughed. "I'm real, I promise. Just a regular guy who happens to own a company and thinks nurses are underpaid and overworked." "Regular guys don't drive Teslas," Grace pointed out. "Fair point," Cameron conceded. "But regular guys do appreciate good conversations with interesting women." Was he flirting? Grace couldn't tell. Her flirt detection skills had atrophied from disuse. Between nursing school and working doubles, her dating life had been non-existent for the past 3 years. "Well," she said, gathering the blanket, "this interesting woman needs to sleep before she falls over. Thank you, Cameron. Really." "Keep the blanket," he said again. "And Grace, don't hesitate to text if you need a ride. I mean it. No strings attached. Just one person helping another." "Okay," Grace said, and this time she meant it. She got out of the car and walked to her building, and once again Cameron waited until she was safely inside before driving away. Grace climbed the stairs, thinking about how Cameron Drake, tech CEO, millionaire, creator of the system she used every day at work, had now driven her home twice and given her his personal fleece blanket. And how she was definitely developing feelings for him that were wildly inappropriate given their circumstances. The pattern continued. Over the next month, Grace texted Cameron 4 more times. Each time, he showed up within 30 minutes, no matter the time of day or night. Once it was 2 a.m. after a particularly brutal emergency that had gone sideways. Once it was 7 p.m. on a Tuesday when her bus broke down halfway home. Once it was a Saturday afternoon when she'd stayed late to cover for a sick colleague. Each time, Cameron never made her feel like an inconvenience. He'd show up, flash that easy smile, and ask about her day. They'd talk during the drive, real conversations about work, about life, about dreams and frustrations and everything in between. Grace learned that Cameron had started his company in his garage 10 years ago, with $5,000 in savings and a laptop. That he'd been engaged once to a woman named Melissa, who'd left him when the company was struggling because she didn't sign up to marry someone who might fail. That he still coded sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, because it reminded him why he'd started in the first place. Cameron learned that Grace had always wanted to be a doctor, but couldn't afford medical school. That she'd grown up in a small town in eastern Washington with a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to put her through nursing school. That her favorite part of nursing wasn't the dramatic emergency saves, but the quiet moments with patients who just needed someone to listen. They talked about books, movies, the absurdity of Seattle's weather, the best late-night food in the city. They debated whether AI would replace jobs or create new ones. They shared favorite coffee shops and argued good-naturedly about whether the Seahawks would make the playoffs. It was easy, comfortable, like they'd known each other for years instead of weeks. But Grace was also acutely aware that every time Cameron picked her up, he was in expensive clothes driving an expensive car, while she was in stained scrubs barely making rent. She was aware that he owned a company while she was drowning in student debt. She was aware that whatever was developing between them existed in a fundamentally unequal space, and she didn't know what to do with that awareness. It was Mrs. Chen from the first floor who finally called Grace out on it. Grace was checking her mail on a Sunday afternoon when her elderly neighbor appeared in the lobby, arms full of grocery bags. "Let me help," Grace said immediately, taking several bags. "Thank you, dear," Mrs. Chen said, leading the way to her apartment. "These old bones aren't what they used to be." They brought the groceries into Mrs. Chen's neat, fragrant apartment. It always smelled like jasmine tea and something delicious cooking. "I've been meaning to ask," Mrs. Chen said, as Grace helped put items in the refrigerator. "Who is the handsome man who keeps dropping you off? I've seen him 3 times now. Always very polite, always waits to make sure you get inside safely." Grace felt her face heat. "Just a friend who gives me rides when I need them." "Just a friend," Mrs. Chen repeated, her tone suggesting she didn't believe that for a second. "A friend who drives a very expensive car and looks at you the way that man looks at you." "What way?" Grace asked, despite herself. "Like you're something precious, Mrs. Chen said simply. "Like he can't quite believe his luck that you're in his car." "You're seeing things," Grace protested. "We barely know each other." "I've been married for 53 years, Mrs. Chen said. "I know what attraction looks like." And that man is attracted to you, Grace Winters. Even if he is, Grace said, which I'm not saying he is, it doesn't matter. We're from completely different worlds. He's successful and wealthy, and I'm just... Just what? Mrs. Chen asked sharply. Just a nurse who saves lives? Just a woman who works herself to exhaustion helping others? Just someone with a good heart and a strong spirit. Don't you dare diminish yourself, girl. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. I'm broke, Mrs. Chen. I can barely afford my rent. I eat rice and beans for dinner most nights. My car is dead and I can't fix it. What would someone like him want with someone like me? Everything, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Because money isn't what makes a person valuable. Character is, kindness is, and you, Grace, have both in abundance. If he can't see that, he's a fool. But from the way he looks at you, I'd say he sees it very clearly. He's just being nice, Grace whispered. He feels sorry for me. Men don't drive across the city at 2 a.m. for people they feel sorry for, Mrs. Chen said. They do it for people they care about. The question is, do you care about him? Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then, honestly, I'm starting to, and that scares me. Good, Mrs. Chen said. Being scared means it matters. Now, stop being so stubborn and proud and let yourself accept help from someone who wants to give it. Grace thought about Mrs. Chen's words all week. She thought about them during her shifts, during the quiet moments between emergencies, during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. She thought about how Cameron never made her feel less than for needing help. How he asked about her day like he genuinely wanted to know. How he'd remembered that she liked her coffee with cream and no sugar, and had handed her one from his cup holder last week without being asked. Small things, thoughtful things. Things that suggested he was paying attention in ways that went beyond casual kindness. On Thursday evening, Grace's phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. Hey, I know this isn't an emergency ride request, but I'm downtown near the hospital. Want to grab coffee? Grace stared at the message. This was different. This wasn't her needing help. This was him asking to spend time with her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every rational part of her brain said this was a bad idea. That getting more involved with Cameron Drake was asking for heartbreak. That the gap between their lives was too wide to bridge. But the part of her heart that had been lonely for so long, the part that lit up every time she saw his name on her phone, that part said something different. That part said, take the chance. Grace typed back, I get off in 20 minutes. There's a good coffee place 2 blocks from the hospital. Cameron's response was immediate. Perfect. I'll meet you there. 20 minutes later, Grace walked into Lighthouse Coffee, a small local place that always smelled like fresh roasted beans and had a wall full of books customers could borrow. And there was Cameron, sitting at a table by the window, 2 cups already ordered, one with cream and no sugar. He stood when he saw her, and the smile that crossed his face made Grace's heart skip. Hi, he said. Hi, she replied. And just like that, something shifted. This wasn't a ride home in the rain. This wasn't emergency assistance. This was Cameron Drake asking Grace Winters to spend time with him. Not because she needed help, but because he wanted her company. And as Grace slid into the chair across from him and wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, she realized Mrs. Chen had been right. She did care about him, deeply, and judging by the way Cameron was looking at her, like she was something precious, like he couldn't quite believe his luck, he cared about her too. The question was, what were they going to do about it? They talked for 2 hours. The conversation flowed like it always did, but there was a different energy now. An awareness. They weren't just 2 people passing time during a car ride. They were 2 people choosing to be together. Cameron told her about the pressure of running a company, how every decision affected 200 employees and their families, how sometimes he woke up at 3 a.m. terrified he'd make the wrong call and people would lose their jobs. Grace told him about the patient she couldn't save last week, a grandmother who'd coded during what should have been a routine procedure. How she'd held the woman's daughter while she cried and felt utterly helpless. They talked about their mothers, Cameron's who'd passed, Grace's who'd sacrificed everything to give her daughter opportunities she'd never had. They talked about what they wanted from life beyond work. Cameron admitted he'd built his company partially to prove Melissa wrong, to show her that walking away from him had been a mistake. But lately, he'd realized that validation from someone who'd hurt him didn't matter anymore. Grace admitted she'd thrown herself into nursing partially to avoid dealing with how lonely she was. That working doubles meant she didn't have to go home to an empty apartment and face the fact that at 31, she had work friends but no real relationships, no dating life, no one who knew the real her. "I know you," Cameron said quietly. Grace looked up, startled by the intensity in his eyes. "I know you're brave and strong and willing to carry weight that would crush most people," Cameron continued. "I know you're proud, but not too proud to ask for help when you really need it. I know you care about people so much it hurts you sometimes. I know you're scared of being vulnerable, but you're doing it anyway. Right now, talking to me. I know you, Grace. Maybe not everything yet, but enough to know I want to learn the rest." Grace's throat was tight. "Cameron, I'm not good at this," he interrupted. "I've spent 10 years building a company and putting everything else second. I don't know how to date, how to build a relationship, how to let someone in, but I want to try, with you, if you're willing." "We're so different," Grace whispered. "Our lives, our circumstances." "We're not that different," Cameron countered gently. "We both work too hard. We both care too much. We both know what it's like to sacrifice for something important. Yes, I have more money than you do. But Grace, money is just resources. It's not character. It's not connection. And what I feel when I'm with you, that's real. That matters more than any bank balance." "What do you feel?" Grace asked, needing to hear him say it. "Like I can breathe for the first time in years," Cameron said simply. "Like I'm not performing, or pretending, or trying to be the person everyone expects. Like I'm just Cameron, talking to someone who sees me as a person instead of a CEO or a resource or a disappointment. You make me want to be better, Grace. Not richer or more successful, just better." Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. "You make me feel seen, like I'm not just the scrubs I wear or the job I do, like I matter beyond what I can do for other people." "You do matter," Cameron said fiercely. "So much." They stared at each other across the small table, and Grace felt the last of her resistance crumble. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay," Cameron repeated, hope lighting his face. "Okay, let's try this," Grace said. "Whatever this is, I'm terrified and I don't know how it's going to work, but I want to try." Cameron reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "We'll figure it out together. No rush, no pressure, just two people getting to know each other. Two very different people," Grace felt compelled to point out. "The best partnerships are," Cameron said with a smile. "My CFO is completely different from me. My best coder thinks in ways I never could. Differences make things stronger, not weaker." Grace laughed through her tears. "Did you just compare our potential relationship to your business structure?" "Maybe," Cameron admitted sheepishly. "Sorry, occupational hazard. Let me try again. Grace Winters, I think you're amazing, and I want to take you on an actual date where I pick you up, and we do something fun, and I try to impress you with my limited charm." "Limited charm?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "You've been pretty charming so far." "That was accidental," Cameron said. "Wait until you see me actually trying. It's painful." Grace smiled, really smiled, feeling something like joy bubble up in her chest. "Okay, Cameron Drake, take me on a date. Impress me." "Saturday night?" Cameron suggested. "I'll pick you up at 6. Wear something comfortable." "That's mysterious." "I'm going for mysterious," Cameron confirmed. "Is it working?" "Maybe," Grace said, but she was still smiling. When they finally left the coffee shop, it was dark outside. Cameron walked her to the bus stop, and when the bus pulled up, he caught her hand. "Thank you," he said softly, "for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for seeing me," Grace replied. She got on the bus, and through the window, she watched Cameron standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching until the bus pulled away. Grace leaned her head against the window, her hand still warm from his touch, her heart feeling fuller than it had in years. She had no idea where this was going, no idea if it would work, no idea if a nurse and a CEO could build something real across the gaps in their lives. But for the first time in a long time, Grace Winters was willing to find out. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect Seattle autumn weather that made people forget about the 9. Months of rain, clear skies, crisp air, golden afternoon light that turned the city into something magical. Grace had spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to figure out what comfortable meant in Cameron date terms. Was it jeans and sneakers comfortable? Dress and flats comfortable? She'd finally settled on dark jeans, ankle boots, and a soft burgundy sweater that her friend and fellow nurse Marissa had insisted made her eyes look amazing. She'd also, for the first time in months, put on makeup. Not much, she never wore much, but mascara and lip gloss and a touch of blush that hopefully disguised the fact that she'd worked a 12-hour shift on Thursday and was still recovering. At exactly 6 p.m., there was a knock on her door. Grace took a breath, checked her reflection one last time, and opened it. Cameron stood in the hallway in dark jeans, a gray button-down with the sleeves rolled up, and a navy jacket. He held a small bouquet of flowers, not roses, but wildflowers, in shades of purple and yellow that looked like they'd come from a farmer's market, not a fancy florist. "Hi," he said, and there was something almost nervous in his expression that made Grace's heart melt a little. "Hi," she replied, taking the flowers. "These are beautiful." "I remembered you said you liked wildflowers," Cameron said. "You mentioned it during one of our drives, something about how your mom used to pick them on the way home from work." Grace stared at him, touched that he'd remembered such a small detail. "I did say that. I can't believe you remembered." "I remember everything you tell me," Cameron said simply. "Should I be worried that sounds creepy?" Grace laughed. "Maybe a little, but I'll allow it. Come in for a second while I put these in water." Cameron stepped into her apartment for the first time, and Grace tried to see it through his eyes. It was small, a studio with a kitchen alcove, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a sleeping area, separated from the living space by a bookshelf. But she'd made it cozy with string lights, plants on every available surface, books stacked everywhere, and photographs of her mom and nursing school friends tacked to a corkboard. "This is nice," Cameron said, and he sounded like he meant it. "It feels like you." "It's tiny," Grace said, filling a vase with water. "It's warm," Cameron corrected. "Lived in, like someone actually lives here instead of just sleeping here sometimes." Grace thought about what his place probably looked like, all modern and expensive and designer decorated, and felt a flash of self-consciousness. But Cameron was looking at her bookshelf with genuine interest. "You have the entire Discworld series," he said, surprised. "I love Terry Pratchett." "Really?" Grace lit up. "Most people haven't even heard of him." "Night Watch is one of my favorite books," Cameron said. "I read it at least once a year." "That's my favorite too," Grace said. "The part where Vimes tells the young Vimes to think about where he is and what he's doing," Cameron finished with her. "Yeah, that scene destroys me every time." They grinned at each other like co-conspirators who discovered a secret language. "Okay," Grace said, setting the vase on her small table. "You've scored major points with the flowers and the Pratchett knowledge. Where are we going?" "That," Cameron said, offering his arm, "is still a surprise." They didn't take the Tesla. Instead, Cameron led her to a different car parked on the street, a well-maintained but older Honda Accord in forest green. Grace stared at it. "This is not what I expected." "The Tesla's great for work meetings," Cameron said, opening the passenger door for her. "But this was my mom's car. I kept it after she passed. It reminds me of her, and honestly, it's more comfortable for what we're doing tonight." Grace slid into the passenger seat, touched by the explanation. The car smelled faintly of vanilla and old leather, and there was a worn copy of Mary Oliver poems in the door pocket. "Your mom liked Mary Oliver?" Grace asked, pulling out the book. "She loved her," Cameron said, starting the car. "She used to read Wild Geese to me when I was stressed about school or work. Said it reminded her to breathe." Grace flipped to that poem and read the opening lines aloud. "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves," Cameron continued from memory. "Mom had that taped to her bathroom mirror." They drove north, out of the city, and Grace watched the urban landscape give way to trees and water. She still had no idea where they were going, but she was starting to trust that wherever it was, Cameron had put thought into it. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said after a while. "Anything. Why didn't you tell me who you were that first night? You could have introduced yourself as the CEO of the company whose software I use every day, but you just said you owned a tech company." Cameron was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the wheel. "Because I've learned that when people know who I am and what I'm worth, they treat me differently. They want something from me, or they make assumptions about who I must be. But that night, you just saw a guy offering a ride. You were yourself with me, real and honest and unfiltered. I didn't want to lose that. So, you've been pretending to be regular Cameron instead of CEO Cameron? I haven't been pretending anything, Cameron said firmly. The guy who drives you home, who talks to you about books and life and everything else, that's the real me. The CEO part is just what I do for work. It's not who I am. Grace understood that distinction better than most people might. She was a nurse, but that wasn't the entirety of her identity either. Okay, she said, but Cameron, no more secrets. If we're doing this, I need you to be honest with me about everything. Deal, Cameron agreed. Same goes for you. I'm an open book, Grace said. You're really not, Cameron said gently. You're one of the most guarded people I've met. You help everyone. You work yourself to exhaustion for others, but you almost never let anyone help you. That's its own kind of wall, Grace. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because he was right. Okay, she admitted. Fair point. I'll work on that. We'll work on it together, Cameron said, and reached over to squeeze her hand briefly before returning it to the wheel. They ended up at Golden Gardens Park, a beach on Puget Sound with views of the Olympic Mountains across the water. The sun was just starting to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and purple. Cameron pulled a basket from the trunk, an actual picnic basket which made Grace smile. You planned a picnic? I planned a picnic, Cameron confirmed. Is that too cheesy? It's perfect, Grace said honestly. They found a spot on the beach away from other people, and Cameron spread out a blanket and started unpacking the basket. But instead of fancy catered food, there were containers of what looked like homemade dishes. Did you cook? Grace asked, surprised. I tried, Cameron said, looking almost embarrassed. You mentioned you eat a lot of rice and beans, so I figured you might want actual variety. I made pasta salad, sandwiches from this deli you mentioned liking, fruit salad, and I attempted brownies, but they're a little burnt on the edges. Grace felt her throat tighten. You made me food. I wanted to, Cameron said. Is that weird? I can be weird sometimes. Marcus tells me I overthink things. It's not weird, Grace said softly. It's the nicest thing anyone's done for me in a long time. They ate as the sun set, and the food was simple but good. The kind of meal that came from someone actually trying, not from a restaurant or caterer. The brownies were indeed burnt on the edges, but the middles were perfect, and Grace ate too. Tell me about your mom, Grace said as they watched the sky turn from gold to deep purple. You talk about her sometimes, but I want to know more. Cameron was quiet for a moment, then started talking. He told Grace about growing up with a single mother who'd worked constantly but always made time for him, about how she'd taught him to code on her old laptop when he was 12, saying that technology was the future and he needed to be part of it, about how she'd worked night shifts his entire childhood so she could be at his school events during the day. She sacrificed everything for me, Cameron said. And when I started the company, when it finally took off and I could afford to let her retire, she refused. Said nursing wasn't just a job, it was who she was. She kept working until the cancer made it impossible. She sounds incredible, Grace said. She was, Cameron agreed. You remind me of her sometimes, the way you talk about your patients, the way you put everyone else first. She was the same way. Is that why you keep helping me? Grace asked carefully. Because I remind you of her? No, Cameron said, turning to look at her directly. I help you because I care about you, Grace. Not because you remind me of my mom or because I'm trying to fill some void. I care about you because you're brilliant and strong and kind and you make me laugh. Because talking to you is the best part of my week. Because when I'm with you, I feel like myself instead of like the person everyone expects me to be. Grace felt her heart racing. Cameron, I'm falling for you, Cameron interrupted, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. I know our lives look completely different on paper, but I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. And I needed you to know that before this goes any further. Grace stared at him, at this man who'd driven her home in the rain, who'd remembered she liked wildflowers, who'd made her burnt brownies and brought her to watch the sunset. This man who could have anyone but was choosing her. I'm falling for you too, she whispered, and it terrifies me. Why? Because what happens when you realize I'm just a broke nurse who can't keep up with your life? When the novelty wears off and you remember that you're a CEO and I work doubles just to make rent, then I'll remember that titles and bank accounts don't matter, Cameron said firmly. That what matters is how you make me feel, how you challenge me and ground me and make me want to be better. Grace, I've dated women who had everything on paper: money, success, connections, and every relationship felt hollow because it was based on what we could do for each other's careers or images. But you see me, just Cameron, the guy who codes at 3 a.m. and misses his mom and burns brownies. That's worth more than anything else. Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. I don't know how to do this, how to let someone in, how to trust that you won't leave when things get hard. Things are already hard, Cameron pointed out gently. You're drowning in student debt. Your car's broken. Your rent is strangling you. I'm not running. I'm here, Grace, and I'll keep showing up as long as you let me. Grace leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, but Cameron responded immediately, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. When they pulled apart, both breathing harder, Grace rested her forehead against his. Okay, she whispered. I'm all in, terrified, but all in. Good, Cameron murmured against her lips. Because I'm not going anywhere. They kissed again, deeper this time, and Grace felt something fundamental shift. She was letting someone in, really in, and for the first time in years, that felt like possibility instead of risk. They stayed at the beach until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing. Cameron told her about his plans to expand the company into telemedicine. Grace told him about a patient she'd helped through a crisis last month, a woman who'd sent her a thank you card that Grace kept in her locker. You keep the cards? Cameron asked. All of them, Grace admitted. On the really hard days, when I lose someone or everything goes wrong, I read them. They remind me why I do this. That's beautiful, Cameron said softly. On the drive back to her apartment, Grace's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, and her expression changed. Everything okay? Cameron asked. It's the hospital, Grace said, reading quickly. Major accident on I-5, multiple vehicles. They're calling in everyone who's available. She looked at Cameron apologetically. I have to go in. Of course, Cameron said immediately, already changing direction. I'll take you. Cameron, you don't have to. I'm taking you, he said firmly. No arguments. 20 minutes later, Cameron pulled up to the emergency entrance. The parking lot was already chaos. Ambulances, police vehicles, people rushing everywhere. Grace unbuckled her seatbelt, then paused. Thank you for tonight, for everything. I'm sorry it got cut short. Don't apologize for saving lives, Cameron said. Go, do what you do. Grace kissed him quickly and jumped out of the car. But before she closed the door, Cameron called out, Grace. She turned back. I'm proud of you, he said, for what it's worth. Grace felt her chest tighten with emotion, then nodded and ran toward the entrance. Cameron sat in the parking lot for a moment, watching her disappear into the controlled chaos of the ER. Then, instead of leaving, he found a parking spot and walked into the hospital lobby. He told himself he was just making sure Grace was okay, that he'd wait a few minutes and then leave. But as the hours passed and he saw the stream of injured people being wheeled in, saw the exhausted staff running from room to room, saw the families crying in the waiting area, Cameron understood something fundamental about Grace that he'd only intellectually grasped before. This was her world, this chaos, this pressure, this constant stream of human suffering and desperate need. And she chose to walk into it every single day. At 2 a.m., Grace emerged from the back, looking for the vending machines. She was still in her street clothes, but had thrown scrubs on over them, her hair pulled back, exhaustion written across her face. She nearly walked past Cameron before she registered he was there. What are you doing here? She asked, shocked. Waiting for you, Cameron said simply. Cameron, that was 6 hours ago. You should have gone home. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Grace sank into the chair next to him, and Cameron could see the weight she was carrying. It's bad. 7 vehicles, 13 casualties. We lost 2 already. There's a 10-year-old in surgery right now who might not make it. Her voice cracked on the last part, and Cameron wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against him. I'm sorry, he said quietly. That's incredibly hard. This is the job, Grace said, but she was shaking. This is what I signed up for. But sometimes it's so much, Cameron. Sometimes I don't know how to carry it all. You don't have to carry it alone, Cameron said. I'm here. Let me help. You can't fix this, Grace whispered. You can't throw money at it or code a solution or make it better. People are dying. A mother is upstairs right now, being told her son probably won't survive the night. There's no fixing that. No, Cameron agreed. But I can sit here with you. I can listen. I can remind you that you're doing everything you can and that matters. Every person you saved tonight gets to go home because you were here. That's not nothing, Grace. Grace turned her face into his shoulder and cried quietly, and Cameron held her, this woman who carried so much and asked for so little. They sat like that for a long time, in the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital lobby, surrounded by the sounds of pain and emergency, holding on to each other. I need to go back, Grace finally said, pulling away and wiping her eyes. I know. You should go home. Get some sleep. I'll wait, Cameron said. Cameron, I'll wait, he repeated firmly. However long it takes, when you're done, I'll drive you home. End of discussion. Grace looked at him with something like wonder in her exhausted eyes. Why are you so good to me? Because you deserve it, Cameron said simply. Now, go save lives. I'll be here. Grace kissed him, hard and quick, then disappeared back through the doors. Cameron settled in for the long wait, and as he watched the organized chaos of the emergency department through the windows, watched the staff running themselves ragged to save strangers, watched Grace emerge periodically, looking more exhausted each time but never stopping, never giving up, he understood something profound. He'd thought he was successful, thought building a company and making millions made him someone important. But Grace Winters, who could barely afford her rent, who worked herself to exhaustion for people she'd never met before, who cried for the ones she couldn't save and showed up the next day anyway. She was doing work that actually mattered, and he wanted to spend the rest of his life supporting that work, supporting her. Because somewhere between offering her a ride in the rain and watching her run toward crisis instead of away from it, Cameron Drake had fallen completely in love with Grace Winters. The only question now was how to show her that she didn't have to choose between her calling and being loved, that she could have both, that she deserved both, and that he was going to make damn sure she got both. Grace got the eviction notice on a Tuesday morning in early November. She'd just gotten home from a night shift, bone-tired and looking forward to sleeping until her evening shift started, when she saw the official-looking envelope taped to her door. Her hands shook as she opened it. Notice of lease termination. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Grace read it 3 times before the words actually registered. They were kicking her out. The new property management company had decided to renovate all the units and convert them to luxury apartments, and current tenants were being forced out to make way for people who could afford 3 times the rent. She sank down right there in the hallway, her back against the door, the notice clutched in her hand. 30 days. She had 30 days to find a new apartment in Seattle, one of the most expensive rental markets in the country, while working full-time and barely scraping by. Grace pulled out her phone and started searching rental listings. Studio. Apartments in Capitol Hill, $20,200 minimum. 1 bedrooms, $20,500 and up. Even if she moved further out, to neighborhoods with longer commutes, she was looking at $1,800 minimum, plus first and last month's rent and a security deposit. She did the math in her head. She had $1,100 in savings, her emergency fund that she'd been building for 2 years. First, last, and deposit would be at least $5,400. She was short by $4,300. She could ask her mom, but her mom was on a fixed income and had her own bills. She could take out a loan, but she was already drowning in student debt. She could pick up more shifts, but there weren't enough hours in the day to make up that kind of shortfall in 30 days. Grace sat in that hallway for 20 minutes, cycling through options that all led to the same conclusion. She was going to be homeless in 30 days. Her phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. Good morning. How was your shift? Want to grab lunch later? Grace stared at the message. Cameron, who could solve this problem with a single check, who probably spent more on a dinner out than she needed for a deposit. She could ask him. The thought made her feel sick, but the alternative was worse. Grace stood up, unlocked her door, and walked into her apartment. She sat on her bed, still in her scrubs, and called Cameron. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, I didn't expect to actually hear your voice. You usually just text." "Cameron, I need to talk to you about something." Her voice came out strained, tight. His tone immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong? Can you come over, now?" "I'm on my way," Cameron said without hesitation. "Give me 20 minutes." Cameron arrived in 18 minutes, still in workout clothes like he'd run out of the gym the second she called. Grace let him in, and he immediately saw the eviction notice on her small table. "Grace," he said, picking it up and reading it. His jaw tightened. "When did you get this?" "This morning." She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands clasped between her knees. "They're renovating and forcing everyone out. I have 30 days. Cameron was quiet for a moment, reading through the notice carefully. "This is legal, but it's also incredibly predatory. They're displacing long-term tenants for profit." "I know, but legal means I can't fight it. I have to move." Grace's voice cracked. "Cameron, I don't have the money for a new place. I've been looking at listings all morning, and I'm short at least $4,000. More if I have to hire movers or put anything in storage." Cameron set down the notice and moved to sit beside her on the bed. "Okay, we'll figure this out." "How?" Grace asked, and she hated the desperation in her voice. "I've done the math 20 different ways. I can pick up extra shifts, but I can't make up that kind of money in 30 days. I can't ask my mom. She doesn't have it. I'm already maxed out on my credit cards from when my car died. I don't have options." "Cameron." "You have me," Cameron said quietly. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. "I can't ask you for money." "You're not asking. I'm offering." "No," Grace said firmly, standing up and putting distance between them. "I can't do that. I can't be the broke girlfriend who needs her rich boyfriend to bail her out. That's not who I am." "Grace, this isn't about pride." "It's exactly about pride," Grace interrupted, her voice rising. "Don't you see? I've worked my entire life to be independent, to not need anyone, to take care of myself. If I take money from you now, what does that make me? What does that make us?" "It makes us partners," Cameron said, standing to face her. "It makes us two people who care about each other and help each other when one of us is struggling." "You don't struggle," Grace shot back. "You have millions of dollars. You own a company. You live in a penthouse. We're not equal partners, Cameron. We're not even in the same universe of struggle." Cameron flinched, like she'd hit him. "So what are you saying? That because I have money, I'm not allowed to help you? That my resources somehow disqualify me from caring about what happens to you?" "I'm saying I don't want to be your charity project," Grace said, tears streaming now. "I don't want to be the struggling nurse you save because it makes you feel good about yourself. I don't want our entire relationship to be based on you having power and me needing things." "That's not what this is," Cameron said, his voice strained. "Grace, I love you. I'm in love with you. When someone you love is in crisis, you help them. That's not charity, that's love." Grace froze. "What?" "I love you," Cameron repeated, quieter now. "I've been falling in love with you since that first night in the rain, and I'm not going to stand here and watch you become homeless when I have the ability to prevent it. That's not weakness on your part or condescension on mine. That's just what people who love each other do." Grace covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. "This is too much. This is all too much." "I know," Cameron said gently, moving closer but not touching her. "I know this is hard. I know you're scared and proud and fiercely independent. But Grace, independence doesn't mean suffering alone when help is available. It doesn't mean refusing support because you think it makes you weak. It means being strong enough to know when you need help and brave enough to accept it." "And what do I owe you if I accept?" Grace asked, her voice muffled by her hands. "What strings come attached?" Cameron gently pulled her hands away from her face, holding them in his. "No strings, no expectations, no debts. I'm not trying to buy you or control you or make you dependent on me. I'm trying to make sure the woman I love doesn't lose her home." "How?" Grace whispered. "How would it even work?" "However you want," Cameron said. "I can loan you the money and you can pay me back on whatever timeline works for you. I can help you find a place and cover the deposit as a gift. I can co-sign a lease so you have better options. Whatever you're comfortable with, Grace. This is your decision. I'm just offering resources." Grace pulled away and walked to her window, looking out at the street below. Mrs. Chen was coming home with groceries. A couple walked by with a dog, life continuing normally while hers fell apart. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "if I let you help, I need it to be a loan, with a contract, with terms. I'll pay you back every penny, even if it takes years." "Okay," Cameron agreed immediately. "And I find the apartment. I make the decisions. You don't try to upgrade me to something I can't afford long term, or push me toward places that fit your lifestyle instead of mine." "Agreed. And we tell people the truth, that you're loaning me money, not giving it to me. I won't have anyone thinking I'm being kept or taken care of." "Whatever you want," Cameron said. Grace turned to face him. "Why are you agreeing to all this? You could just write a check and make this whole problem disappear." "Because this isn't about me making your problems disappear," Cameron said. "It's about supporting you while you solve them yourself. I get that you need to maintain your independence. I'm not trying to take that away. I'm just trying to make sure you don't drown while proving you can swim." Grace felt something in her chest crack open. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of needing you. Of what happens if this doesn't work out and I owe you money and we're not together anymore. Of losing myself in someone else's resources. Of becoming someone I don't recognize." Cameron crossed to her and cupped her face gently. "Grace Winters, you are the strongest, most fiercely independent person I've ever met. Taking help when you need it isn't going to change that. And for what it's worth, I'm terrified too." "Of what?" "Of messing this up. Of saying the wrong thing or pushing too hard. Or not doing enough. Of losing you because I have money and you think that makes me unable to understand your life. I'm terrified that the best thing that's ever happened to me is going to walk away because she'd rather struggle alone than accept help from someone who loves her." They stared at each other, both scared, both raw, both standing at a crossroads. "Okay," Grace said finally. "Help me. But we do it my way." "Your way," Cameron agreed. "Whatever that looks like." Grace stepped into his arms, and Cameron held her while she cried, from stress, from relief, from fear, from love she was still learning how to accept. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I'm terrible at saying it, and worse at showing it, but I do. I love you." Cameron's arms tightened around her. That's all I needed to hear. They spent the rest of the week apartment hunting. Cameron kept his word. He went where Grace wanted to go, looked at places within her long-term budget, and didn't try to steer her toward anything she couldn't afford on her salary alone. They looked at 12 apartments. Most were depressing, dark, cramped, in questionable neighborhoods with questionable smells. Grace felt her hope dimming with each viewing. Then Mrs. Chen mentioned that her nephew owned a small building in Fremont, and one of his tenants was moving out. It was a one-bedroom second floor, with hardwood floors and big windows and a kitchen that was small but functional. The rent was $1,600, high but manageable with Grace's salary. "It's perfect," Grace said, standing in the empty living room and imagining her books on the built-in shelves, her plants in the windows. "It is," Cameron agreed. "Do you want it?" "I want it," Grace confirmed. Cameron made a call to his attorney, who drew up a loan agreement that afternoon. Cameron was loaning Grace $5,000 at zero interest to be paid back at $200 per month over 2 years and change. It was formal, legal, and entirely on Grace's terms. She signed it with shaking hands, and Cameron signed as witness. "Thank you," she said when it was done, "for respecting what I needed." "Thank you for trusting me enough to help," Cameron replied. Moving day came 2 weeks later, and Cameron showed up with Marcus and 3 other friends from his company, all ready to help carry boxes. "You didn't have to bring an army," Grace protested. "You have a lot of books," Cameron said reasonably. "We needed reinforcements." Mrs. Chen cried when she hugged Grace goodbye and made her promise to visit. Several other neighbors came out to say farewell, and Grace realized how much this building had been her community. But as she opened the door to her new apartment and saw the afternoon light streaming through the big windows, saw the space that was entirely hers, saw Cameron and his friends hauling in her limited furniture, with good-natured complaints about how many boxes one person could possibly own, Grace felt something shift. This was a new beginning. Not just a new apartment, but a new chapter where she was learning to accept help without losing herself, where she could be independent and loved at the same time. "Where do you want this?" Marcus asked, holding a box labeled kitchen stuff. "Kitchen, surprisingly," Grace said with a smile. It took 4 hours to move everything in, and another 3 to unpack the essentials. By the time Cameron's friends left, after Grace had fed them pizza and thanked them about 100 times, it was nearly 9 p.m. Grace and Cameron stood in her new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes but feeling accomplished. "I should let you rest," Cameron said. "You've had a long day." "Stay," Grace said suddenly. "Not like that, just stay. Help me christen the new place with Chinese takeout and sitting on the floor because I haven't set up furniture yet." Cameron smiled. "I'd like that." They ordered from the place Grace had already scoped out 3 blocks away, and they sat on her. Living room floor with containers of lo mein and orange chicken, eating with chopsticks and talking about everything and nothing. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said after a while. "Always. Earlier, when I was panicking about the eviction, you said you loved me. Did you mean it, or was it just something you said in the moment?" Cameron set down his food and looked at her directly. "I meant it. I love you, Grace. I'm in love with you. Have been for weeks. Even though I'm a mess, even though I fought you on accepting help, even though our lives are so different, especially because of all that," Cameron said, "you challenge me. You make me think about what actually matters. You remind me that success isn't measured in dollars or company valuations, but in showing up for people and doing work that matters. You make me want to be better, Grace. Not richer or more powerful. Just better. More human." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I've spent so long taking care of everyone else that I forgot how to let someone take care of me. You're teaching me that it's okay to need people, that it doesn't make me weak. It makes you human," Cameron said gently. "We all need people, even stubborn, independent nurses who think they can carry the world alone." "I'm learning," Grace said. "Slowly, but I'm learning." She leaned forward and kissed him, and Cameron responded immediately, his hand coming up to cup her face. The kiss was soft at first, then deeper, more urgent. When they pulled apart, Grace rested her forehead against his. "Thank you for being patient with me, for understanding why I needed to do it my way. Thank you for letting me be part of your life," Cameron said, "for trusting me with the messy, hard parts, not just the easy ones." They finished their dinner, sitting close together, Grace leaning against Cameron's shoulder, both of them quiet and content. Around midnight, Cameron finally stood to leave. "I'll help you set up furniture tomorrow," he offered. "I'm actually pretty good with an Allen wrench." "That's a very specific skill," Grace said, walking him to the door. "I built my first desk from IKEA instructions," Cameron said. It was traumatic, but educational. Grace laughed, and Cameron kissed her goodnight, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you," he said, "just so we're clear." "I love you too," Grace replied, "just so you know." After he left, Grace walked through her new apartment, trailing her fingers along the walls, looking at her boxes and her plants and her books waiting to be shelved. This was hers, built with her work, supported by someone who loved her, but fundamentally hers. And for the first time in months, Grace Winters felt like everything was going to be okay. Over the next month, Grace and Cameron fell into a rhythm. He'd come over after work and they'd cook dinner together. Cameron learning to actually cook real food under Grace's instruction. They'd watch movies on her small TV. They'd read on her couch, comfortable in shared silence. He'd drive her to work when her shifts aligned with his schedule, and she'd call him when she needed to vent about a hard day. It wasn't perfect. They still had moments of tension when Grace's independence clashed with Cameron's desire to help. They still navigated the reality that they lived in different economic worlds, but they learned to talk through it, to compromise, to respect each other's boundaries while still showing up for each other. Grace started paying Cameron back, $200 transferred every month like clockwork. He'd tried to tell her she didn't have to, that he didn't care about the money, but Grace insisted this was important to her. And Cameron learned that sometimes love meant stepping back and letting her do things her way. At work, Grace told Marissa about the loan, about the fight, about learning to accept help. "Good," Marissa had said firmly. "It's about time you let someone take care of you for a change." "I'm still taking care of myself," Grace protested. "You are," Marissa agreed. "You're just doing it with backup now. That's called being smart, not weak." Grace was learning that distinction, learning that accepting help didn't erase her independence, that being loved didn't mean losing herself. And Cameron was learning too, that loving someone meant respecting their autonomy, even when you had the resources to solve their problems. That partnership meant supporting, not rescuing. That the strongest relationships were built on mutual respect, not on one person's ability to save the other. They were learning together, stumbling sometimes, arguing occasionally, but always coming back to each other. Because at the end of the day, beneath all the complications of money and pride and different worlds, there was something simple and true. Cameron Drake had offered Grace Winters a ride in the rain, and somewhere between the hospital and her apartment, between crisis and comfort, between pride and vulnerability, they'd found something neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed. They'd found home in each other, and they were both finally brave enough to stop running from it. The crisis came 3 months into their relationship, on a freezing January night when Seattle was buried under 6 inches of unexpected snow. Grace was working the night shift when the ambulance brought in a Jane Doe, a young woman found unconscious in an alley downtown. No ID, no phone, no one who knew her name. She was hypothermic, malnourished, and had track marks running up both arms. Grace and her team worked on her for 40 minutes. They got her temperature up, stabilized her vitals, pumped her full of fluids and electrolytes. They saved her life. But when Jane Doe woke up 3 hours later, disoriented and panicked, she saw the IV in her arm and ripped it out. She started screaming that they couldn't keep her there, that she had to leave, that someone was going to be angry. She was gone. Grace tried to calm her, tried to explain that she was safe, that they just wanted to help. But Jane Doe was beyond reason, trapped in whatever nightmare her addiction had created. She swung at Grace, catching her across the cheek with a fist that had more desperation than strength behind it. Grace stumbled back, stars exploding in her vision, and by the time security arrived, Jane Doe had fled the hospital in a thin gown and no shoes, running out into the snow. They found her 2 blocks away, collapsed in the cold. This time, they couldn't save her. She coded in the ambulance on the way back, and despite everything Grace and her team tried, she was pronounced dead at 4:37 a.m. Grace stood in the now empty trauma bay, her cheek throbbing where she'd been hit, her hands still shaking from adrenaline and grief, and felt something inside her crack. She'd been punched by patients before. It happened in emergency medicine, people in crisis, in pain, not in control of peace themselves. She'd never taken it personally. But this time, standing over the sheet-covered body of a woman whose name they still didn't know, a woman who died alone and afraid and trapped in addiction, Grace felt the weight of every loss, every failure, every patient she couldn't save crash over her at once. She walked to the staff bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and sobbed. Marissa found her 20 minutes later. "Grace, honey, your shift ended 10 minutes ago. What are you still doing here?" Grace emerged from the stall, her face blotchy and swollen from crying, her cheek already bruising where Jane Doe had hit her. "Jesus," Marissa breathed, taking in the bruise. "Did you get that checked?" "It's fine, just a bruise." "It's not fine," Marissa said firmly. "And you're not fine. Come on, you need to file an incident report and go home." "She died, Marissa," Grace whispered. "We saved her, and she ran, and she died anyway. What's the point? What's the point of any of this if they just die anyway?" Marissa pulled Grace into a hug. "The point is we show up and we try. That's all we can do. We can't save everyone, Grace. You know that." "I'm so tired of knowing that," Grace said, her voice breaking. "I'm so tired of losing, of working myself to death for a system that doesn't care, of making poverty wages while hospital administrators buy second homes, of putting everything I have into this job and still feeling like it's never enough." "You're burnt out," Marissa said gently. "It happens to all of us eventually. You need to take some time, talk to someone, figure out if you can keep doing this." "I don't know how to do anything else," Grace admitted. "This is who I am." "No," Marissa corrected. "This is what you do. Who you are is so much more than your job, Grace. And if this job is breaking you, maybe it's time to figure out what else you could be." Grace called Cameron from the hospital parking lot at 5:30 a.m. He answered immediately, voice thick with sleep. "Grace? What's wrong? Can you come get me?" Her voice was flat, empty. "I'm at the hospital. I just need you." "I'm on my way," Cameron said, and she heard rustling as he got out of bed. "Stay where you are, 10 minutes." He made it in 8, pulling up in his mother's Honda because his Tesla wasn't great in snow. Grace got in the car, and Cameron took one look at her face, the bruise blooming purple across her cheek, the empty expression in her eyes, and didn't ask questions. He just reached over, took her hand, and drove. They ended up at his penthouse. Grace had only been there once before, briefly, and had been intimidated by the expensive furnishings and floor-to-ceiling windows. But now she was too exhausted to care. Cameron led her to his bathroom, which was bigger than her entire kitchen, and gently helped her out of her scrubs. He started the shower, adjusting the temperature until it was perfectly warm, and stood there while she just stared at the water. "I'm going to wait right outside," Cameron said softly. "Take as long as you need. I'll be here when you're done." Grace stepped into the shower and stood under the spray, watching the water swirl down the drain, trying to wash away the feeling of failure that clung to her skin. When she finally emerged 20 minutes later, Cameron had left clean clothes on the counter, his sweatpants and a soft t-shirt that would be huge on her. She put them on and found him in the kitchen making tea. "Chamomile," he said, handing her a mug. "Mom used to make it for me when I couldn't sleep." Grace wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic and followed Cameron to the couch. She curled up against him, and he wrapped a blanket around both of them. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked quietly. Grace told him everything, about Jane Doe, about trying to save her, about the punch and the escape and the death, about standing in that trauma bay feeling like she'd failed, about questioning whether she could keep doing this job that demanded everything and gave back mostly grief. Cameron listened without interrupting, his arm around her shoulders, his presence steady and grounding. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Grace whispered when she finished. "I love nursing. I love helping people. But I'm so tired, Cameron. I'm tired of the hours and the pay and the emotional weight. I'm tired of giving everything I have and still losing people. I'm just tired." "Then maybe it's time to rest," Cameron said gently. "Not forever, necessarily, but maybe you need to step back and figure out what you actually want instead of just pushing through because it's what you've always done." "I can't afford to step back," Grace said. "I have bills, loans, rent. I can't just take a break because I'm tired." Cameron was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, "What if you could?" Grace pulled back to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the money wasn't an issue? What would you do if you could actually take time to figure out what you want?" "Cameron, we've talked about this." "I'm not offering to support you," Cameron interrupted gently. "I'm asking a hypothetical question. If money wasn't a factor, if you could do anything, what would you want to do?" Grace thought about it, really thought about it. "I'd want to still work in healthcare," she said slowly. "But maybe not emergency medicine. Maybe something with less trauma, less crisis. Maybe public health, or teaching, or clinic work. Something where I could actually build relationships with patients instead of just seeing them on the worst day of their life and then never seeing them again." "That sounds good," Cameron said. "That sounds like something worth exploring." "But it's not realistic," Grace said. "Those jobs don't pay enough. I'd have to go back to school for some of them. I can't afford—" "Grace," Cameron said, turning to face her fully. "Can I say something without you immediately? Shutting me down?" She nodded warily. "I love you," Cameron began. "I'm in love with you. I want to build a life with you. And part of building a life together means supporting each other's dreams and goals. You've been supporting yourself alone for your entire adult life, working yourself into exhaustion, never asking for help, never taking a breath. And I'm watching the work you love destroy you piece by piece." "So what are you suggesting?" Grace asked, though she thought she knew. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to lean on me," Cameron said. "Not forever, not as a permanent solution, but as a bridge to something better. What if you quit the hospital? What if you took 3 months to rest, to heal, to figure out what you actually want to do next? I can cover your expenses during that time, not as charity, not as me taking care of you, but as an investment in our future together, in you having the space to become whoever you want to be, instead of who circumstances forced you to be." Grace felt her throat tighten. "That's a lot of money, Cameron. Rent, loans, living expenses for 3 months. Is nothing compared to watching you break," Cameron said firmly. "Grace, I have resources, significant resources, and I don't want them sitting in investment accounts when I could be using them to give someone I love the space to breathe. Please, let me help you." really help you, not just rides home or deposit money. Let me be your partner in the fullest sense." "What would people think?" Grace whispered. "What would they say about me quitting my job and living off my rich boyfriend?" "They'd say you're smart enough to accept help when you need it," Cameron said. "And honestly, Grace, fuck what people think. This is about you, about your health, your happiness, your future. If you're making this decision based on what strangers might think instead of what you actually need, then they win and you lose." Grace closed her eyes, feeling tears slide down her cheeks. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of losing myself, of becoming dependent on you, of losing my sense of purpose and identity if I'm not a nurse anymore." "You'll always be a nurse," Cameron said gently. "That training, that compassion, that calling, it doesn't go away because you change jobs. You're just redirecting it towards something sustainable instead of something that's killing you. And Grace, you won't lose yourself by taking care of yourself. You'll find yourself. The version of you that isn't running on fumes and grief and stubbornness." Grace opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. At this man who'd shown up in the rain, who'd driven her home, who'd respected her boundaries and fought for her anyway, who loved her enough to watch her struggle but smart enough to keep offering help until she was ready to accept it. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I quit and take time off, I need rules, boundaries." "Name them," Cameron said immediately. "I still pay my own loans. That doesn't stop." "Okay. And I'm actively job hunting during this time. This isn't a permanent vacation. It's a transition." "Agreed. And if we break up—" Grace's voice caught, but she pushed through. "If this doesn't work out, I pay you back, every penny, even if it takes years." Cameron's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "If that's what you need to feel okay about this, fine. But Grace, I'm not planning on us breaking up. I'm planning on us building a life together." "Plans change," Grace said quietly. "Not mine," Cameron said firmly. "Grace Winters, I am all in, completely, utterly, permanently in. And I need you to understand that before you make this decision. I'm not helping you, so you owe me something. I'm helping you because I love you, and I want a future with you. And that future is better if you're healthy and whole and doing work that feeds your soul instead of draining it." Grace looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of doubt or hidden agenda. But all she saw was love and patience and absolute certainty. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it. I'll quit." Cameron pulled her into his arms, and Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief at the idea of not having to carry everything alone anymore. "Thank you," Cameron murmured against her hair, "for trusting me, for letting me do this." "Thank you for loving me enough to keep asking," Grace replied, "even when I made it hard." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other as the sky outside Cameron's windows gradually lightened from black to gray to the pale gold of winter dawn. And for the first time in months, Grace let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Grace gave her notice at Providence the following week. Her supervisor tried to talk her out of it, citing her excellent track record and the shortage of experienced ER nurses. But Grace was firm. "I need to take care of myself," she said. "I can't pour from an empty cup anymore." Her last day was 2 weeks later, and her colleagues threw her a small party in the break room. Marissa made her promise to stay in touch, to not become a stranger. "I won't," Grace promised. "And who knows? Maybe I'll be back eventually, just not in the ER." "Good," Marissa said. "You're too good a nurse to lose to burnout. Take your time, figure out what you want, and come back when you're ready." Grace cleaned out her locker, turned in her badge, and walked out of Providence Medical Center for the last time as an employee. Cameron was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car with coffee, and that smile that still made her heart skip. "How do you feel?" he asked as she approached. "Terrified," Grace admitted, "but also free. Is that weird?" "That's healthy," Cameron said, handing her the coffee. "Come on, let's go home." Home, Grace realized, meant Cameron's penthouse as much as her apartment now. Somewhere along the way, they'd stopped being two separate people with separate spaces and started being a unit, a team. It still scared her sometimes, but it also felt right in ways she couldn't explain. The 3 months that followed were transformative. For the first 2 weeks, Grace did almost nothing. She slept until her body actually felt rested. She read books for pleasure instead of squeezing them in between shifts. She cooked elaborate meals just because she wanted to, not because she needed fuel to get through another night. She let herself breathe. Then, slowly, she started exploring options. She researched public health programs, nursing education positions, clinic jobs that focused on preventive care instead of crisis intervention. She talked to people in different specialties, shadowed at a community health center, volunteered at a free clinic, and she started therapy, working through the trauma and grief she'd accumulated over 7 years of emergency medicine, working through her issues with independence and asking for help, working through the belief that her value came from how much she could give and how little she needed. Cameron supported all of it without hovering. He asked how she was doing, listened when she wanted to talk, gave her space when she needed it. He celebrated her small victories, the first full night's sleep without nightmares, the day she laughed without it feeling forced, the afternoon she realized she'd gone a full week without crying. They grew closer through it all, learning each other's rhythms, each other's needs, learning to be partners in the fullest sense, not him rescuing her or her proving her independence, but both of them building something together. 3 months in, Grace accepted a position as a nurse educator at the University of Washington School of Nursing. It was a 40-hour-a-week position with benefits, decent pay, and no night shifts. She'd be teaching the next generation of nurses, sharing her experience, shaping the future of healthcare. "It's perfect," she told Cameron when she got the offer. "It's absolutely perfect." "You're perfect," Cameron said, spinning her around his kitchen in celebration. "I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done this without you," Grace said, and for the first time, saying those words didn't feel like admitting weakness. It felt like acknowledging truth. "We did it together," Cameron corrected. "That's how partnerships work." 6 months after Grace quit the ER, Cameron asked her to move in with him. They were having dinner at her apartment. She'd insisted on cooking to celebrate him closing a major deal that day when he brought it up. "I know this place is important to you," Cameron said carefully. "You fought hard to keep your independence, to have your own space. But, Grace, you spend half your nights at my place anyway. We're basically living together already, just inefficiently. What if we made it official?" Grace set down her fork. "Move in with you? To the penthouse?" "Unless you want to get a different place together," Cameron said. "I'm not attached to the penthouse. It's just a space. But I am attached to waking up with you every morning instead of some mornings, to building a life together in one place instead of splitting our time." Grace thought about it. The penthouse still intimidated her sometimes with its expensive furniture and stunning views. But it was also where Cameron made her tea when she couldn't sleep, where they cooked together on weekends, where she'd learned to let herself be loved. "What about my stuff?" she asked. "I have a lot of books and plants and—" "Bring all of it," Cameron interrupted. "Bring every book, every plant, every piece of you. I want my space to feel like our space. I want your books on my shelves and your plants in my windows and your art on my walls. I want it to feel like home, Grace. And it can't feel like home without you." Grace felt her eyes sting. "You really want this? The mess and the clutter and me taking up space in your perfect minimalist penthouse?" "I want you," Cameron said simply. "Everything else is just details." "Okay," Grace said, smiling through tears. "Yes, let's do it." They moved her in over the following weekend, and true to his word, Cameron made space for all of it. Her books filled the empty shelves he'd always thought looked too sparse. Her plants brought life to the windows. Her photographs and art warmed up the stark white walls. And watching Grace arrange her things, making herself at home in his space, their space now, Cameron felt something settle in his chest. This was what he'd been missing, not someone to fill a void or complete him, but someone to build with. Someone who made his life richer not by being perfect, but by being real. The proposal came 2 months after she moved in, on a rainy Saturday in October, almost a year to the day after their first meeting. Cameron took Grace back to Golden Gardens Park, to the same spot where they'd had their first date. The sky was gray and threatening rain, but Cameron had brought an umbrella and that same picnic basket. "Why do I feel like you're planning something?" Grace asked suspiciously as they sat on the blanket. "Can't a man just want to have a picnic with the woman he loves?" Cameron asked innocently. "Not when that man looks as nervous as you do right now," Grace said. "Cameron, what's going on?" Cameron took a breath and pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. Grace's eyes went wide. "Cameron, let me say this first," he interrupted gently. "A year ago, you mistook me for a taxi driver. You got in my car soaking wet and exhausted, and you had no idea who I was or what I was worth. You just saw someone offering help when you needed it." Cameron opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, elegant without being ostentatious. "Since that night," Cameron continued, "you've taught me what actually matters. Not money or success or building empires, but showing up for people, being present, being honest, being brave enough to be vulnerable. You've made me a better person, Grace. Not because you tried to change me, but because loving you made me want to change myself." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "I know I'm not perfect," Cameron said. "I still overthink everything. I still solve problems by throwing resources at them. I still don't really know how to cook without instructions. But I'm learning, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning with you, growing with you, building a life that's ours, not mine or yours, but ours together." He took the ring from the box, his hand surprisingly steady. "Grace Winters, will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner in every sense? Will you trust me enough to build a future together, even when it's scary, even when we don't have all the answers?" Grace was crying too hard to speak for a moment. She nodded frantically, then finally managed to choke out, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Cameron slid the ring onto her finger, and Grace launched herself at him, nearly knocking them both over on the blanket. They kissed while rain started to fall around them, and neither of them cared. "I love you," Grace said between kisses. "I love you so much. Even though you're terrible at cooking and you overthink everything, and you tried to propose to me in the rain again." Cameron laughed, pulling her closer. "It worked the first time. Why mess with a successful formula?" "Fair point," Grace conceded, looking down at the ring on her finger. "It's beautiful, Cameron. How did you know sapphires were my favorite?" "You mentioned it once, months ago, when we walked past a jewelry store. You said emeralds and sapphires were prettier than diamonds." I remembered. "You remember everything," Grace said, awed. "When it comes to you?" "Yes," Cameron confirmed. "Every detail, every story, every preference. Because you matter, Grace. You've always mattered." They sat in the rain, holding each other, both of them crying and laughing, and planning a future that a year ago neither of them could have imagined. The woman who couldn't afford a taxi ride home, the man who'd pretended to be nothing more than someone willing to drive her. Both of them transformed by the simple choice to see each other as humans first, as equals, as partners building something real. Epilogue. 1 year later, the wedding was small, held in a community garden in Fremont on a perfect September afternoon. Grace wore a simple dress that made her feel beautiful without costing more than her first month's rent. Cameron wore a suit but no tie, at Grace's insistence that he looked better casual. Grace's mother cried through the entire ceremony. Mrs. Chen from her old building came and brought homemade dumplings. Marissa and half the nursing staff from Providence showed up, as did Marcus and Cameron's entire executive team. They wrote their own vows. Grace promised to keep challenging Cameron, keep reminding him what mattered, keep letting him in even when it scared her. Cameron promised to keep showing up, keep respecting her independence, keep loving her through the messy, hard parts. "I promise," Cameron said, his voice thick with emotion, "that I will never stop being grateful that you got in my car that rainy night, that you took a chance on a stranger, that you let me see you, the real you, behind all the walls you'd built. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." "I promise," Grace said, tears streaming, "that I will keep learning to accept help without losing myself, to be part of a team instead of an army of one, to build our life together instead of always trying to do everything alone. You taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, Cameron. You taught me that love is showing up, over and over, even when it would be easier to walk away. You are my person, my partner, my home." They were pronounced husband and wife, and when Cameron kissed her, their friends and family erupted in applause. At the reception, in a toast, Marcus told the story of how they met. Cameron calling him at midnight after a random encounter with a nurse who seemed interesting. and Marcus knowing immediately that his best friend had fallen hard. "He tried to play it cool," Marcus said, grinning. "But I've known Cameron for 15 years, and I've never seen him like this. Grace, you didn't just change his life, you gave him one. Thank you for seeing the person beneath the success, for calling him on his bullshit, and for being stubborn enough to match his stubbornness. You two are perfect for each other." Later, as they danced to a song Grace had picked, something slow and romantic, Cameron leaned down and whispered, "No regrets?" "About what?" Grace asked. "About saying yes to the ride that night, about taking a chance on a stranger, about letting me into your life despite all your very valid concerns." Grace smiled up at him. "Not a single regret. Best decision I ever made." "Best mistake you ever made," Cameron corrected. "You thought I was a taxi driver, remember?" "Best mistake," Grace agreed, laughing. "But it led me to you, so I'd make it again in a heartbeat." They swayed together as the sun set over Seattle, surrounded by people they loved, building a life neither of them had planned, but both of them had chosen. Grace Winters, now Grace Drake, had learned that strength wasn't just about independence. It was about knowing when to accept help, when to lean on someone, when to trust that being loved didn't diminish her, but enhanced her. And Cameron Drake had learned that success wasn't measured in money or company valuations. It was measured in moments like this, dancing with his wife, surrounded by community, building something that mattered more than any empire ever could. They'd both been transformed by a simple encounter on a rainy night, by someone offering help, by someone accepting it, by two people choosing to see each other as they really were, and deciding that what they found was worth fighting for. And as they kissed under the string lights while their friends cheered, both of them knew that this was just the beginning of building a life together, the beginning of partnership built on respect, love, and the courage to be vulnerable, the beginning of everything that mattered.